Thank you everybody for joining us today. We've got a great topic that we're going to talk about. I've got two experts on the call with me today. So I'm excited to have FifthWall Solutions and techrug with us. And then just to kind of kick us off, Justin, why don't you kind of introduce yourself and techrug?
Yeah, so as the slide says, the founder CEO of techrug. We currently work with 1,900 clients on cyber policies. A large majority of those are managed service providers such as Shawn, and then we work with the relationship that we've got with FifthWall and making sure that the MSP's end client, i.e. the people on this call, are properly protected with the correct cyber insurance. Because I think one of the mistakes that a lot of end clients of MSPs make is, hey, Shawn's got insurance, I'm good, and we educate them that there is a cyber universe. Shawn's in charge of his planet. He's not insuring the universe, so you need your cyber policy for that. So that's what we do here at techrug.
Yeah, and full disclosure, we do have a cyber insurance policy with techrug. So
there you go.
That's right. That's right. And then my good buddy Wes, how about a quick intro from you?
Yeah, Shawn, hey, thanks for having me. Shawn and I go way back for many, many years. I met Shawn in the days when I was at Perch Security. Perch is a company that I founded way back with some others in 2016, and that's how I met Shawn. And Shawn has actually been really pivotal for us and just helping us understand this journey of cybersecurity among small and mid-sized business. And so now I'm at FifthWall, and it's really been exciting. We're just helping organizations of all sizes, from tiny little 3-4 people shops all the way up to really large, get through this cyber insurance journey. And I know we're going to be talking about that today. It's confusing, it's challenging, it seems like it's tumultuous and things are moving all the time on it, but it's a risk management component that every organization has got to think about. So I'm really excited to be here and be talking about all this good stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. All right, we'll skip this one. I know we've got a disclaimer.
Yeah, it's a pretty simple one. Yeah, pretty simple one. So just keep in mind, this is for educational purposes today. We insurance folks are always talking about these things. We're not giving you actual quotes, just be aware of that, right? And you really need to have a licensed agent to talk through the specifics. Justin, by the way, is one of those licensed agents and can talk about the specifics, right? But you'll hear me on the call very often saying things like "in general," so you really want to be careful of that. It is important. So as we get into this, definitely educational. You're going to learn a lot, I promise. But just know when you want to get into the specifics on where you're at, that's where you want to talk to somebody qualified and licensed.
All right, good job.
Yeah, so Shawn, here's probably a great place to start for folks. I think it's important you understand why cyber insurance is so incredibly important, right? And there's a lot of different directions you can go on this, but I think the truth is that things have really changed over the past maybe 5 years. We've seen more and more cyber threats come down market, and what I mean by that is they're not just going after Bank of America. Right? If you work, let's say you work at a bank or you're a bank robber, you're going to go after Bank of America where they got like armed guards everywhere, like the downtown headquarters, or they're going to go after a small rural mom and pop bank. They're probably going to go after what's smaller. Even though the takeaway might be much less, the effort is far lower. And so it's important to understand that we are seeing threats come down market like crazy. And I thought what we would start with is a few examples. These are not like made up theoreticals. These are ones that happen every day. And Justin will probably jump in on some of this too if he wants to, because we see these things from an insurance side of the house where claims are made. And so the first one to talk about is, let's say you have an employee. They're going about their day. They're not malicious. They're not trying to do anything malicious. They just inadvertently transfer some kind of malicious software, whether it's a virus or it's something that leads to something really nasty like ransomware. We all know what this stuff looks like. And things got out of hand, right? And the client ended up, it caused them a lot of damage, and they sue for losses totaling over $3 million. This happens. Wow. And it's not just the cost of the ransomware, right? Justin, you can attest to this. It's the cost of recovery, of data notification. There's a lot of other impacted costs that happen inside these damages, right?
Yeah, and I think, another thing that people, don't really realize is that, you know, an insurance policy is obviously a reactionary policy. At this point, you've called the fire department. So, you know, imagine having to go through, for example, a ransomware attack when the preferred method of payment is digital currency. Well, those folks that aren't set up, how do you convert money into digital currency? Is not as easy as you think, you know, so then you got to take time doing that. And, you know, what about, you know, if you make the local news, or, you know, there's some sort of PR expenses, you know, getting with a public relations firm, and then we've got to get someone, you know, that, you know, potentially has to come in and do forensics. Well, do we know forensics people that we can call? My point, right, Wes and Shawn, is that, you know, without an insurance policy, I've spoken to manufacturers reps. I've spoken to, you know, folks that own wholesale companies that have been shut down 3 and 4 weeks. And they've said, hey, here's my name and number. If you ever need me to talk with someone, please use my name and number, have them give me a call, because I'll tell you what a nightmare it is to go through what I deemed was something. Again, we see stuff that's major, what I thought was something minor. And then you're losing clients because you can't satisfy orders or whatever it may be. You can't access emails. Then clients, they'll put up with it for a day or two. They don't do it for a week. They start getting irritated. They say, screw it, I'll move. Well, you know, an insurance policy, by having something that is able to respond, you know, within hours, you know, latest within a day, you know, you have somebody on negotiating, hiring forensics. So, you know, the vendors have, or I'm sorry, the carriers have gotten really good at, you know, incident response, right? They almost are IR firms, right? They're not insurance companies anymore. So, you know, that's the important, is cutting down the downtime and the business interruption, because if this goes on too long, there's a lot of, you know, loss of income that comes with that.
Nailed it. Nailed it. And this is exactly why this is like compounded much more than you might think of, like the old days of, oh, I got ransomware on a computer, I pay $10,000, the computer's recovered and off I go. This totally different world. So that's awesome. So another example is, you know, an email that you get, you think that it's from one of your vendors, right? That you've been doing business with for a really long time. Like, hey, we've made some account changes, and this next bill that you have coming due we needs to go over here instead. We changed banks, right? And you get that and you say, okay, that's okay, no problem. So we make the changes, and before you know it, we wire off $200,000 as part of a payment for some invoice, and we don't discover it until a couple days later when we're reconciling accounts, and the vendor's like, hello, you haven't paid us yet. And you're like, yes, I did. I wired out that money like you guys said to that other address. We didn't send that. What are you talking about? This is called business email compromise, and it happens every day. It's actually the largest threat in terms of volume that's out there. Justin, you want to talk about a little bit about that, like why this is so damaging and why cyber insurance is a critical piece here?
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's 2 ways to address this. I mean, first of all, the carriers are going to hold your hand and mandate that you have certain security in place, because as Wes said, this is a huge problem. So, you know, this is why we've got Shawn on the call, but, you know, he'll guide you with making sure that you've got multi-factor in the right places. You know, making sure that your you know, employees are doing security awareness training. I mean, there's a couple things going on. But when it comes to these type of things, I think the thing that I want people to pay attention to is when you get your cyber insurance, your cyber insurance policy, there will be a provision in there usually for cyber crime. Don't go buy the cyber insurance, you know, when it's an endorsement. I can do it in my insurance agent E&O. When you read through it, they aren't going to typically, you know, address cyber crime. You know, if you add an endorsement onto your business insurance policy, not going to typically, you know, cover cyber crime. Even if it does, Wes and Shawn, $10, $15, $20,000. But as this, you know, example gives you, this is $200,000. But if you do get a cyber crime endorsement onto your cyber insurance policy, it will be usually sublimited. So when I say sublimited, you might take out $1 million policy and say, wow, I've got $1 million of cyber crime. No, they're typically going to give you $100,000 to $250,000. If you want to go above that, now the carriers are very, very selective on who they'll insure and what, you know, what protections you have in place, but you can buy a standalone crime policy. Okay, so a lot of people that say, hey, listen, you know, we get a lot of escrow attorneys, 250,000 isn't going to cut it. We then have to look at a standalone crime policy. So they're out there. You can get limits usually up to $3 million, but from a security standpoint, you better be crossing every T and dotting every I.
Okay, that's good. And we're going to dive into a little bit more on the policy side of the house. We'll show you some examples of like what that can look like here in a minute. Another scenario is this like supply chain kind of attack, right? So let's say that you're a small accounting firm, and let's say that a hacker of some sort gets access to one of your employee email accounts, right? And then they use that to do some nasty things, right? They use some emails that they send out. Maybe they take some of that data hostage and they say, we've stolen a bunch of your client information. But this idea of clients leveraging you as the middleman, as an accounting firm, to go after all your clients or embarrass you and your clients with the data they've stolen, this sort of idea of a supply chain attack is a really, really big deal. I mean, Shawn, you can talk about this just being a managed IT provider. That's probably the number one thing that keeps you guys up at night. And I know it's why SnapTech takes security so seriously, because you guys think about the same thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I've got an example that was not necessarily an accounting firm, but a law firm. Exact same thing happened. We came in and kind of helped do the incident response and helped clean up the mess that kind of occurred. But we see this all the time.
Yep.
Yeah, it's sad.
Justin, any comments there on that one?
No, I think you guys nailed it. Yeah.
Okay, so a couple more that we want to go through as well. How about this one right here? So imagine if a hacker gets access to the email account of one of your folks, right? And they use that to do some nefarious things. One of the most common examples, and I know it sounds like funny, but it does happen all the time, is gift card scams, right? And so they get access to your CEO's email and like, hey, we need a bunch of these gift cards to go out. And you're like, oh, well, that's from the CEO. I better follow orders here and go grab those things. And then you send out the codes and off it goes, right? It could be many other examples of this. But that impersonation kind of stuff does happen all the time, and it's a pretty big deal to think about too. And it's another reason where insurance is so important to help cover that. Justin, anything else there?
Yeah, no, again, they do happen. They're a frequency problem. They're usually not a severity problem. So what I mean by that, you might be out $5,000 or $10,000. Pay attention to your deductible. I'm a big believer in, get the limits that are appropriate, but try to keep the deductible lower, because typically people say, I want to pay premiums if I want to use the insurance policy. I don't want to have a $10,000 deductible. They try to claim $12,000. They get a little irritated when they have to cut the $10,000 check. Plus, they have to pay their premium. So I always say on those, keep your deductible low.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Let's talk about reputational damage, because this is something that's become mega important over the past few years. As bad guys, one of the things hackers do these days is they don't just hit you with ransomware. Before they run the ransomware, they go and they pull down your client lists. They understand your accounts payable. They know who you're paying and who pays you. And they leverage that and actually reach out and email those people and say, we have breached this company. We know you do business with them. We're going to leak all this information. You better call them and ask them how they allowed this to happen, and they better pay up. They do all of this to really force us. In the aftermath, Justin, you mentioned this, of like the week that goes on, the 2 weeks that go on where things are out and down because of ransomware, and clients are barking angry, as they ought to be. This is reputational damage I don't think we always think about. I have a friend that went through a major ransomware attack up in New York. He lives up in New York City, and he said, Wes, I lost about 30% of my clients in the aftermath of a breach. He said one of the most painful ones, he said, was a client of mine. I'm good friends with it to this day. And he said, hey, he said, I love you guys. I understand it happened. I don't hold it against you, but my main client is forcing us to fire you, because they know that we had outages from all of that. And they came back and said, we're not renewing your contract unless you move away from that provider. So these are reputational damages that I don't think we always really recognize. And it's really hard to put our finger on exactly how damaging they're going to be. Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is, to me, is a true, definition of kidnap and ransom insurance, right? I mean, we've had it where, hospitals or medical practices have gotten hit, and they start leaking 6 digits of your social security number instead of 4. Well, how'd you get that? We'll go talk to XYZ hospital, and then as great as the technology is, right? I mean, Shawn will get, make sure that things are backed up and we can pull backups, but, at what point are you going to allow them to continue to damage, the reputation you have? It almost turns into, again, hush money or just paying to get rid of it. So it's as the technology gets better on that, when there is a ransomware attack, we see a lot more of this going on.
Yeah.
Just a story around that, Wes and Justin, we got called into a case for a small college that had gotten hit, and the school was not responding quick enough to the criminals, and so they started going out to their Facebook page and posting student record data and social security numbers on their Facebook page as an incentive to speed things along. So great example of how they are using that information and how they publish it out.
Yeah, ouch. That
Yeah.
hurts.
Yeah, it was
So,
not a good situation.
No, indeed. That hurts. So if you guys have questions as we're going through this, by all means, pop them in, and Shawn will have those available to ask us. The last one, and we'll be really quick on this, is just disruption to your business. The average ransomware attack for like a small and mid-sized business is 16 days of outage time. So just think about, and sometimes I've seen it far longer. Imagine just taking just business outage alone. Take your monthly revenue and slash it in half. That's staggering to some folks just to think about outage time. Shawn, I know you guys are in Atlanta, and you guys saw the big city of Atlanta ransomware attack that happened a couple of years ago, and they chose not to pay the ransom, which I'm really glad for, but caused significant outages. You want to share just a horror story? I'll bring up some PTSD from you.
Well, there was definitely that one. I think there were systems in Atlanta that were shut down for months at a time as they were trying to recover and restore systems and restore things from backup. The other one that really comes to mind, especially a more recent one, if you're from Atlanta, was the Colonial Pipeline. Another great example of an attacker that got in and really disrupt the whole gas pipeline and wreaked havoc in our industry, in our city and all up and down the East Coast. That was pretty crazy. It was funny though, because the moment I heard that had happened, I kind of messaged all my friends and was like, I would highly encourage you to go get gas before this becomes mainstream. And sure enough, gas ran out a couple of days later. So
wild. Justin, from your side of the house, business disruption and times, do you see about 16 days? Are you seeing it a lot longer? What do you guys see?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, a lot of it depends on, how much data was encrypted, so there's a very, people, is it a terabyte or 2 terabytes, but that flows what we say 2 to 3 weeks, is generally what we see. Some can be earlier, some can be later, but again, it's how much data was encrypted. And, people always think that the decryption process is a smooth process. I can't tell you the number of times we paid for, even test keys, right? Because you don't buy the whole thing. And it doesn't work. And then we got to wait 2 more days to get the keys back. And then you unencrypt the data and you think it's all going to be unencrypted, and 70% of the data is unencrypted. And it can be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Well, the school I was telling you about actually ended up paying the ransom, and the encryption keys they got didn't work. So it was a double whammy.
Yeah, I always feel like those, you got to be careful. That's bad business, because it better work,
That's right.
Yeah. So let's talk about this tactic shift a little bit. One of the things that we've seen bad guys do is move into going after humans and this idea of human error, right? Many attacks start, you see about this, like, it's not like you see on the movies where you get like push button, get ransomware, and they find this scary thing that no one knows. That stuff does happen. But I think by and large, the majority of attacks that occur are going after people. They start from phishing attacks. You guys all know what phishing attacks are. We've been seeing this stuff for 15 years now, and we're still in 2022. And here we are with phishing attacks being the #1 attack vector. Maybe websites that you go to, maybe files that you open. These are the entry points that happen every day. Or maybe your account is compromised because you use the same username and password for one site that got breached a long time ago, and bad guys use the same password for your email today, just as an example. And there's not multi-factor involved, and bad guys leverage that. So oftentimes it's the human error that's the most damaging, and bad guys know this. They know that they can go after the human as the weak link, and they've been doing this for years. And so just wanted to cover that as like, this is a big reason why, from the insurance side of the house, from a risk protection, this is why it's so important to think about all of that. Just anything else that comes into your mind on this?
And I don't know if it was an order report because I haven't reviewed it in that diligence in a year or two, but one time, staff mistakes from rogue employees accounted for like 23% of the claims that they saw in the insurance companies that participated. So now I tell people, we just had somebody, that gave birth, right? In the last 2 or 3 days, she wasn't sleeping too well. I can do all the security awareness training, but if you're sleeping 2 hours a night for 3 straight days, sometimes you just click on something you shouldn't have, and I don't know how to get around that.
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of like COVID and being sick. You can do all you want to do to get around it, and it's going to hit you at some point. That's exactly right.
Yep.
So let's talk about how we got here, because I think this is a really big issue. You know, it used to be like Oprah up in here, right? Like you get insurance, you get insurance, you get cyber insurance. Everyone got it, right? Like it was basically, if you have a name, a business name, you can fog a mirror, you're good to go. I remember those days in my bank. Man, it was so easy. I think we were rolling with like 3 million of cyber coverage. I don't remember the cost, but it was easy. It was simple. And this is like 2013. And I think what we saw back then was there wasn't a lot of underwriting that had to happen, because I don't think the carriers understood just how much of a growing risk this was going to become. And so I sort of call those 2015 to 18, days of bliss. It was easy, but there wasn't a ton of adoption. I think a lot of companies are like, I don't think I really need that stuff. I'm not a target. No one's coming after me. It's the big companies that are out there that need it. I'm good to go. And so you had this challenge of like, we didn't have enough policies written, so we didn't really see how systemic things were. And also the volume of attacks hadn't really hit fever pitch like they have today. Justin, that's kind of how you guys see it as well, from 2015 to 2018, that's kind of led into these problems?
Yeah, and I think the carriers, some did a little bit better job of underwriting than others, but I think the main thing is that, and this happens with everything, right? Is that the carriers write a policy and then they say, wow, we didn't expect that insurance agreement to work like that, and then so they have to refine it, right, and the definition, right, or they may add an exclusion. So definitely the 2015 to 18, even into the 19 policies, I'll take you even to 20. They're broad. They do a lot of things for very little money. And so I think that's what the carrier were looking at. And then all of a sudden they're going, well, wait a second. Now I'm collecting $1, but I'm paying out $2.50. So, I would ask businesses on this call, how long can you continue to do that? I mean, when you're talking about multi-billion-dollar companies, they can put up with it for a year or two because they might make a lot of money on landscapers, bakeries, homes, and autos. So they can, offset that loss, but they're not going to do it for that long. And so, that's kind of where we're at today. Probably not to jump ahead of Wes, is that, it's more stringent underwriting. They're definitely big brothering clients and making sure that they're keeping an eye on you. They've shifted on the policies, what they've done. So a popular thing right now on the cyber extortion is, some of the carriers are adding co-insurance. It's they're taking that from the health insurance industry. So just real briefly, what co-insurance is, if you have a $2 million policy and a 20% co-insurance clause, then you're on the hook for $400,000 and they're on the hook for $1.6 million. So how many organizations on this call have $400,000 that they can do? Pay attention to co-insurance. Very popular right now with some of the carriers.
Wow. Yeah. It really does change the metrics of how much capital you have to have set aside to truly manage that risk. Wow.
And I even think one thing, Wes, just to let you know, I was reading it. I think it was dark web reading, but I don't know exactly the article. So I saw, and I don't know what the final number was, but in the first 6 months of 2021, there were 300 attempted and executed ransomware. So double that, and let's say it's 600 million was the final number. I don't know that that's accurate. But in the first 3 months of 2022, it was up 80% of all of last year. So if you think about it, that number was $600 million last year. In the first 3 months, there was 1 billion ransomware attacks and attempts. This problem isn't going away. So as much as we're talking about insurance, and Shawn will probably love me for saying this, you got to be proactive with this, because the policy is a reactionary product. Make sure that you are listening to your IT service provider, your MSP, and Shawn in this case, and looking at the MFA, looking at security awareness training, look at 3-2-1 segregated backups, look at EDR, MDR. There's certain things, I'm throwing out acronyms, I'll let Shawn talk to you individually, but make sure that even if the carrier isn't requiring it, make sure that you're doing it, because if you get to the point, I would tell people, run a ransomware fire drill on your system today. You'll ask me what that is. I'll say, have Shawn actually tomorrow unplug your network at 8 o'clock in the morning and turn it back on at 5 and tell me how your day goes. Yes, there's a financial aspect, but there's also a mental aspect. I mean, we've had people, I wouldn't share if it wasn't true, people that have had to take Klonopin, sleeping pills, go to therapy sessions like Night Rider lighting, do knitting therapy. So I'm just sharing with you, we talk to clients post-breach 2 years down the road, but there's a mental toll to these things.
Yep.
That's a drop the mic right there.
All right, we're done.
We're done. Yeah, you nailed it. Let's jump into the next slide, because I mean, there's nothing more that I could add. That was fantastic. Justin, you want to talk to us? You mentioned endorsements. You want to kind of explain what endorsement is, and not all of this is created equal. You really need to have a conversation to understand, exactly what you have. You want to kind of talk through this?
Yeah, it's true. So, we touched upon this a little bit, previous. Not having coverage isn't a good thing. We kind of talked about that. But an endorsement would be like an add-on to the policy, right? It's enhancing the policy. So, there are cyber endorsements that you can add if we've got accountants, architects, engineers, lawyers, doctors on here, me as an insurance agent. We all carry professional liability, medical malpractice, errors and omissions. There are add-ons that you can, endorse onto your policy that will give you typically a lower limit. Heck, sometimes maybe they'll even go the full limit. So if I carry $1 million of E&O or professional liability, maybe they'll give me $1 million. But it typically addresses, the disclosure of PHI and PII. And Wes and Shawn, I always tell clients, there's 3 buckets that clients, when we ask them, what keeps you up at night when it comes to a cyber event? The first one is that theft or disclosure of PHI and PII, the notification, right? You got to meet state statutes. You have to hire forensics. You got to provide credit monitoring. That's kind of that bucket. But we haven't heard people complain about that for probably 3 years. Everyone else gives us the other 2 buckets, the middle bucket, which is called the systems bucket. And that's where I said, if your systems go down, try to operate your business. An endorsement usually does not address, business interruption. It doesn't address cyber extortion. If it does, it might be $25,000 or $50,000 limits. I don't know what Bitcoin's trading at, right? But if you get hit and, they've got, 10 endpoints and each one's a Bitcoin, $25,000 isn't going to get you too far, So that systems group you got to pay attention to. And then the last one, we touched upon it on the claims example, a lot centered around business email compromise and cybercrime events. An endorsement typically is not going to address that exposure. So stay away from endorsements. Go with the standalone cyber policy. As we say here, they typically start at $1 million. There's some underwriting that gets done. I'm just going to be truthful with everyone on this call. People ask me all the time, what's the appropriate limit I need? And I say, if I'm going to tell you the truth, I don't know the answer. And they'll say, well, why don't you know the answer, Justin? Because I don't know if the ransom is going to be 200,000 or 2 million, because I've seen them both. I don't know if the downtime is going to be 2 days or 14 days, because I've seen them both. The longer the downtime is, the more expense. So, I would say that determining limits is a tricky thing. And anyone that can tell you that you got the correct limits, honestly, I think they're just lying to you, but start with the standalone policy, start with this, $1 million. And even when these standalone policies, I think we'll get to this in the slide, you got to pay attention to what the carriers now are starting to do in terms of, exclusions or definitions that are intruded, in the policy. Like, is your data covered by a third party? A lot of carriers are now saying you have to have a written contract. So does the accounting firm on this call have a written contract with Microsoft? Probably not. So does that definition meet the needs of your company?
That's why Shawn, you hit the next slide. If you would, that's exactly why you've got to have these conversations, right? It's why it's so critical in all of this. Let's talk about the crisis management services and kind of like what happens after a breach. Justin, you want to kind of go through a number of the things here that occur after the big boom event occurs?
Yeah, and this is where we talked about a little. If you don't have a cyber policy, imagine again having to go through all of these steps. You're gonna have to put your business on the sidelines for weeks and start going at this. And it's a hard way to learn a lesson. Whereas if you have a cyber policy, the carriers have what they call a panel list. The panel list are vendors that are ready to go in case the fire happens, right? So they've got legal counsel. Legal will usually act as the general contractor. Use a building example. They're the home builder that's the general contractor. They're going to work with forensics, notification, i.e. the plumber, the HVAC, the electrician. They're going to make sure that all that goes. So usually the point person on this breach is going to be legal counsel. It'll be a law firm that is assigned to you. So they're going to start working with the forensics. They're going to know the people to go to. Notification, public relations, all that stuff's going to go along. I always encourage policyholders to, and it might be an additional cost. Some law firms won't necessarily do it, some will, but I always tell them, get a hold of a vendor on the panel list, especially the legal counsel, and establish a relationship. Why is that important? As more and more people are taking out cyber policies, these large national law firms that the carriers look to, they have to do what they call conflict checks, okay? So if potentially one of your clients who had a cyber policy is on this event and the law firm may sue you or have subrogate and go after your carrier, it takes the law firm hours to do conflict checks. Well, if you're not first in line and you go to law firm A and there's a conflict check, then they can't represent you. Now we got to go to carrier B. So that takes another several hours, I was on one where we had to do 5 conflict checks and it took 36 hours. So as cyber policies are starting to become more and more part of your mainstream insurance portfolio, much like a business insurance policy or a workers' comp policy, cyber's really getting to that point. And I would encourage you to reach out to a law firm that's on the panel list and establish a relationship so that you can be first in and your claim will get adjusted and get addressed quickly.
Okay, there you go. So let's hit the next slide. And go ahead, Shawn.
That's a really good point. Good job. I hadn't really even thought about the conflict.
And one thing, and I hate to say it because people invest in these incident response plans and they're great, right? But the more detailed the incident response plan, Wes and I do a lot, Chris at Solus, Chris Lair's a popular guy in our industry that helps deal with the bad guys. But, the more detailed the incident response is, actually the worse, because again, the carriers have their own version of how they're going to deal with the incident response plan. So that's why I think it's really important to get with them and their team to develop an incident response plan. Don't go rogue on your own and start setting it up, because when it comes to claim time, you're going to want to use law firm A and forensics A. We're going to want to use law firm B and forensics B. So just a little note there. These are just important, and I don't want to read to people on the call, but these are the important things that you really want to pay attention to. And listen, as a benefit of being on this call with Shawn, I'll send a list of kind of the 20 important insuring agreements that we like our clients to look for. But I think some of the major ones are obviously going to be cyber extortion. If there's a ransomware, making sure that you've got that. Obviously, if the ransom takes place, it's like one domino is going to knock down 4 more. So make sure you got business interruption. Do you have coverage for, what they're calling it data replacement and recovery, but basically to reproduce that data if we need to. Do you have, money for forensics? If we have to notify every, I think it's now maybe 48 states have laws on the books privacy. Whether or not they got PHI or PII, that's not your call. You have to have somebody come in and tell whether that PHI or PII was compromised, So I think this is a good one. One that, is coming up more and more often is that, the bricking coverage or computer hardware replacement, for people that still have on-prem devices, on-premises, not in the cloud, there are costs associated because when they hit you with that ransomware, they destroy your hardware. And a typical business insurance policy has an equipment breakdown provision in the policies that says if there's a power surge or electric arcing, it doesn't address if there's a ransomware attack. So a lot of these big name carriers now are limiting the scope of how they address computer coverage on their business insurance. And they're restricting it and kicking the bricking coverage over to the cyber carriers and not addressing it on your business insurance policy. So pay attention to that one, because I've seen a couple big name carriers with endorsements now where they're just limiting the computer coverage to theft, vandalism, fire, similar to what your furniture would be. You guys noted here, it's towards the bottom there, the cyber crime events, the electronic theft, social engineering, telecom theft. Again, it puts always sublimited. It will always be sublimited. If you want to increase that, you're going to have to purchase a standalone crime policy. So this is a good list to go to. I'll send Shawn another one so you can have a PDF version for anyone that attended free of charge.
Yep, and we'll make sure we get that kicked out along with the recording of this for everybody as well. So absolutely.
Which is good, because there's so much stuff that, Justin, you always do this and I love it. You just unpack so much to think about. So this is why we're doing this, is to convey the knowledge. It's why we recorded it, because I'm sure you're going to want to hear this, go back to it, send it to others inside your org, and furiously take some notes. Let's talk about quickly just eligibility here. So what we're seeing is a standardization across carriers on a minimum set of core security controls, to where you're probably not going to get approved. If you're going through your application process, you're probably not going to get approved if you don't have these things in place. So I'll quickly go through each of these. Multi-factor, you know what that is. Multi-factor is where you get some kind of code that comes with a login. Usually they happen with like an anomalous login. If you log in from a brand new computer, a new location, multi-factor is going to come engaged in there and say, great, you got a username and password, that's great, but what's the rotating code? Usually it's on your phone. In some cases it comes in through text message, but this is a critical component. And I know some businesses resist it and like, I don't like that, that's going to get in my way of doing business. Well, first of all, it doesn't happen every time you log in, right? If it's properly configured, it's only at anomalous times. And second, it takes you another 10 seconds. It's worth it. Trust me. If for no other reason other than insurance, it's just going to say no without it. It's got to be in place.
10 seconds is way better than being down 2 weeks.
Bingo. I think everyone agree with that. Segregated backups. This is what Shawn and team do for you. If you don't have them in place, you need to talk to them, because what they're going to do is they're going to make sure your backups are what's called air gapped, to where when we make those backups, they're not accessible by a bad guy. It's called immutability sometimes, which you'll hear this, but when those backups are made, a bad guy can't go to that and delete your backups. That's one of the things they love to do to make life difficult to recover. Shawn, anything else you want to say on that?
Yeah, I'll tell you, this is one that we still see a lot when we come in and do kind of our IT discovery and risk assessment with, potential new clients. We see this, still to this day, where the backup system is on the same network, and it's a server called backup. And guess what the criminals are going to go attack first? It's the server called backup. But I'm still shocked that we still see so much of this going on, and people haven't addressed this kind of air gap backup solution.
Yep, it's got to be corrected. Absolutely. Yep. And insurance is wised up to that. Security awareness training. We talked about that just a little bit. Phishing simulation. Justin mentioned earlier, it's not perfect, right? You have the 2 a.m. employee that just super tired and they just miss it. But it does do a lot of good around just making sure that we have the bases covered and we understand where these threats are coming from. It's one of those things that insurance has seen, hey, if this reduces the prevalence by training our users and making them a little bit more aware and hardened, this is good, right? And so you're seeing this happen. If your organization hasn't gone through this, it's really time to visit that and begin this, because even a little bit of good can go a really long way. Patching, vulnerability scanning. This is stuff that SnapTech and Shawn and team do for you guys all day, every day. One of the worst things that can happen, it's just like if I refuse to go to the dentist and go get things checked up and get a cavity filled, things are going to get worse. I'm going to end up with a root canal. Same way with phishing or with patching and vulnerability management. If I'm not regularly looking for these things, patching the old things, updating the old things, we're going to get ourselves into a world of trouble. I was on with a client who got denied ransomware coverage just recently, and they had a bunch of very old Windows 2008 servers that are over a decade old. Think about that, 2008. No surprise that when they disclosed a number of these things, the carrier said, nope, no, we're not gonna deal with this. So these things happen. And then the last one that's a little bit more complex is what's called next generation antivirus, and EDR stands for endpoint detection response. Think of this as a 24/7 alarm system over your home, right? Like where you're watching over the hallway monitors and windows opening. Same thing for your network, where we're looking for signs of intrusion. We're looking for strange things happening on computers. And we actually have 24/7 personnel that are watching over this. Shawn and team are able to do this for you and bring this in. This is becoming a standardization. And the reason is because we understand we're in this age of assume breach, that it's going to happen at some point. So we want the 24/7 overwatch. When those things happen, we want to know about it. We want to take action immediately. We want to do something about it so that we can reduce that blast radius and ultimately kick a bad guy out before a big ransomware event happens. Anything else you want to say on these things, Shawn, that strike for you?
Yeah, so we help people all the time that go through these kind of insurance questionnaires. I will say that the questionnaires have gotten a lot longer and more detailed. Justin, you probably can speak to that. But Wes, and I guess my question for you too is, and Justin, maybe you can kind of answer this too. What are things that people can do to help reduce their kind of deductibles or insurance by implementing some of these things? Does it help?
Yeah, so the answer is no right now. So, as I mentioned earlier in the call, it used to be several years ago, Shawn, and it's a really good question, where the carrier would say, hey, if you don't have EDR, for example, instead of $3,000, it's going to be $7,000. And then an organization might say, well, EDR is going to cost me $11,000, so to pay an extra $4,000 or $3,000 extra insurance, I'm better off than doing the EDR. Well, guess what? The carriers still couldn't collect enough money, so they still kept taking it on the chin. So now, unfortunately, with the insurance carriers where we're at, and I think, as premiums, I know people don't want to hear this, unfortunately, continue to climb up, I think we'll get to the point where if you, go through like a SOC 2 Type 2 or, go through some additional stuff, I think maybe you'll get a discounted premium. But right now, for most of the carriers, again, I'm generalizing, it's not everyone, it's either you do it and you get the premium, or you don't do it and you don't get the premium. As Wes said, he had somebody that got denied. And that's kind of where the carriers are at, because they found that even if we raise your premium $3,000, you know, okay, so instead of 3, you paid us 6, and we just paid out $1 million. You know, how many more, you know, $6,000 policies do we have to write to collect just that $1 million for that one client? So, you know, they're really, you know, do this, and they're honestly, they're getting more, you know, not only invasive from a question standpoint, but invasive from external scans and kind of what they're doing. They're big brothering a lot of, you know, clients. So I don't know, Wes, if you're seeing the same thing over there at FifthWall.
Yeah, no, we are seeing that 100%. And the only other thing I'd say is sometimes you see the opposite. Instead of rewarding you, they punish you. So if you don't have EDR in place, we saw this happen just the other day. A client was looking for $1 million in aggregate limits, and they didn't have EDR in place. And so the carrier came back and said, fine, max we're going to underwrite for ransomware damages is $250K. That's the highest we're going to go without this. And so you actually see the opposite of that right now. So yeah, it is a tumultuous. This is why we call it a hard market right now. Like, it's tumultuous. Rates are going up. You see inconsistencies across the board. You might see new requirements come in from carriers. And Shawn, I would just say my biggest piece of advice for those that are on the call today is get in front of it. If your policy is renewing in the next probably 60 days, now is the time to get in front. Now is the time to reach out to us, have the conversation, talk to Shawn and team, and really get the ball rolling because you don't want this to sneak up on you. And also, if you don't have it in place, now that you understand how significant this is, been dodging some bullets, it's really time to really think hard about this.
Yeah. And I do have just one quick question. Yes, we will send the slides out along with the recording and the document from Justin as well. So if you have any other questions, you know, jump in there and answer them or ask them, and we'll make sure we get those answered for you. Speaking of questions and discussions, while we wait maybe just for a minute or so on some questions coming in, Justin, any good kind of parting thoughts and words for us?
No, listen, I mean, I think, you know, I'm on with 2 well-respected people in our community. So I would say, you know, keep listening to Shawn's advice. And, you know, Wes and FifthWall do an extremely good job at evaluating cyber policies. And, you know, they do a very good job of, you know, making sure that, you know, they're teaming up with the right carriers that are offering the right coverage. So, you know, I'd probably encourage you, if you're up for renewal, you know, it's free to look. I would check out Wes and FifthWall just to kind of take a glance and see what they can offer. You know, the other benefit is, you know, so many times people, you know, establish a relationship, you know, with the local agent, right? Well, the local agent isn't going to be able to come on and educate you what's going on in the industry. So, you know, I think by getting, you know, staying in the loop with Shawn and Wes's team over there at FifthWall, you know, I think that you're going to get, you know, some, you know, proactive advice, right? But you're also going to be guided in changes in policy forms and maybe some things you got to pay attention to. And, you know, I just brought up that thing about coverage for, you know, data in the cloud. That might be a little nuance that, you know, a typical agent, because they're selling landscapers, bakeries, homes, and autos, they're not going to even read the policy. All they're going to do is collect their commission. They're probably golfing right now at 2:45 Eastern time. You know, whereas Wes is going to be going through that in the team and analyzing, making sure that you know, that those coverages tailor fit your organization. So I think the people on the call are in good hands with these 2.
Awesome. Wes, parting words?
No, yeah, hopefully we've triggered some thoughts for you. And if you feel overwhelmed or scared, reach out, talk to Shawn, talk to me, talk to Justin. We'll get you on the right track. There's a lot of right things you can do, and there's a lot of wrong things. And we just wanted to open up this conversation because at the high level, we're talking risk management for your organization. And it's one of the most important things that's out there.
Awesome. Well, on behalf of everybody here at SnapTech, Wes, thank you very much for joining us. Justin, always a pleasure. Thanks for jumping on and helping kind of educate us and our community. Like always, we'll continue to put on these kind of educational webinar content just to kind of help, you know, educate, right? That's the name of the game with these. So look out. We'll be, you know, doing other webinars in the near future. Check our site. There's a resource section there that's got a lot of great information on it. This will be posted there as well as an event section that'll have our upcoming things that we're doing in the near future. So Wes, Justin, thank you guys very much. I really appreciate it. And we'll get together and maybe have a Miller Lite with Justin and some bourbon with Wes in the near future. So, all right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Shawn.
We'll see you next time.
All right, see you guys.